Hi, you're
Hello,
muted.
everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm presenting a title called Challenges and Opportunities when Deploying a Gender STEM Initiative During a Pandemic. The authors on this paper were Professor Richardson from Lero in UL, Linda Higgins from Johnson & Johnson, and myself from Lero in UL. So a little bit of background. So we all know women are underrepresented in STEM, and there are many initiatives that they have been implemented in efforts to change this imbalance, including in primary, secondary, and third level institutions. Some are supported by governments, for example, in Ireland with Science Foundation Ireland, by professional bodies such as IEEE, and by companies. The initiatives are targeted at STEM in general and at subsets of the discipline. And there are many STEM interventions worldwide from which we in software engineering can learn a lot. The logistics around planning and implementing a STEM intervention program, though, are many. And this is compounded when a program must quickly pivot and change how it is provided due to external factors. So while this presentation and the paper that I'm discussing presents our experience of one STEM intervention at the University of Limerick, the J&J Johnson & Johnson YSTEM 2D program, it also discusses and describes the challenges and the opportunities that become apparent when an intervention has to completely change how it is deployed and implemented due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So why have initiatives? Well, as I've mentioned, there's a lack of gender equality, and it's a global issue in STEM education and careers at all levels. Females are underrepresented, as I mentioned, in STEM, and unfortunately, in many countries, there are gender differences in the involvement and attainment of women in STEM education and STEM careers. Typically, this is unfortunately to the disadvantage of women. For example, in Ireland, the availability of STEM subjects is more limited in all female schools. Limited STEM subject choices in schools have also been seen internationally. Another issue as well is that the high numbers of women who drop out in higher education and STEM careers is at a much higher rate than men. At the University of Limerick in 2019 and 20, the percentage of female students enrolled in the undergraduate ICT courses was 17.2%. The quality of the learning experience for female students is compromised by things like gender stereotypes and biased attitudes that limit their education choices. So there is a need to advance STEM education, and it is important for meeting social and economic challenges and for also developing technically literate citizens. Education at all levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary, can play a key role, and relevant STEM interventions have been developed. Research has shown that there's a positive relationship between attending STEM programs and students' aspirations towards a STEM career. They benefit from advantages such as the learning environments. The STEM concepts can enable them to develop their practical skills and interdisciplinary knowledge. Interventions can enable students to see the value of academic tasks. And students can see the value then of these such tasks that they become, when they see the advantage of these tasks, they can become more highly motivated, more engaged, and ultimately more interested in the area. One type of initiative to implement is an intervention, for example, through scholarship, training, and mentoring. Research has found that interventions do matter. They can increase engagement in STEM in the long term, and the long term is very important. Repeated participation in interventions is better than one-off or short-term ones. To achieve gender equality in STEM education, there is no one preferred type of intervention identified in the research. Interventions must address the interconnected factors influencing students' participation, such as how families and school and societies have perceptions around STEM. Such interventions can be transferable to specific STEM disciplines, such as computing and software engineering. So the J&J YSTEM 2D program. What is it? Well, Johnson & Johnson, they're a multinational company. They have developed this program, and it's a global program they launched in 2015. And YSTEM 2D stands for Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, Maths, Manufacturing, and Design. It's an intervention by Johnson & Johnson, as I mentioned. The program has partnerships globally in countries such as Japan, Brazil, Ireland, and the United States. The University of Limerick, where I'm from and where I work, basically has received funding from J&J for a number of years. YSTEM 2D expands further the area of STEM by adding two other relevant subject areas, which I mentioned there, manufacturing and design. So what is the aim or the intention of this program? It is to inspire and support more women through the program to pursue STEM 2D subjects, in general, to pursue STEM 2D studies and careers globally. It's to nurture females' STEM 2D interests, to help them grow and develop in these areas, and to prepare them and to align them to careers in STEM 2D. By doing this, mentorships, site tours, workshops, and bursaries are provided. So why STEM 2D and UL? Who can apply for this program? Students in UL in their second or third year of their courses, if their course is STEM 2D related, or if they have STEM 2D subjects within their course, can self-select themselves to apply for the program. If a student is successful, they are put into teams. And for a student to be successful, they have to go through, as I said, they self-select themselves, so they apply. They have to fill in a form, and on that form, there are questions and there are essay-style answers that they have to complete. They go through an interview process, and on that process, there will be people from UL and Johnson & Johnson who interview the students. And the chosen students then, as I mentioned, are put onto teams. And the teams then are going to carry out some research on a STEM 2D topic. So prior to the pandemic, the program, as I mentioned, had mentorship, workshops, and a bursary. All events were in person, and it allowed for networking. It allowed the students to meet people from different courses. There was different events and the team projects. So the students were put onto different teams. So you could have a student from a software engineering course on a team with someone from mechanical engineering or product design or manufacturing. So students got to meet people from other areas within the university that they might not typically have had the opportunity to meet. So the impact of the pandemic, it affected everybody, but everything then had to be moved to a virtual way of working. And because the program before that was totally in person and had the advantage of bringing, as I mentioned, networking for the students and the ability to meet other people that they might not normally get to meet, moving virtual, totally 100% virtual, was a challenge. And I've said there in the slide, they're same boat, same storm, different boat. What I mean there is it affected all of us in different various ways. So the students had to deal with lots of things. Some of them were just in second year of their university course, so they weren't very long in university. And at that time where you would be making friends, working in different groups, that all had to change. Everything had to be, as I mentioned, remote. So it was very isolating for a number of students and very isolating as well for staff. So staff could not meet their students anymore. Everything had to be virtual. And along with that comes then technical issues. So the teams and the projects, the way the program worked was, as I mentioned, teams were selected and teams had to work on projects. This still happened during the pandemic, but unfortunately, the team members never got to meet in person. So this brought up a number of challenges and a number of opportunities. Firstly, it allowed the program to streamline the process. Because the whole program had to be reevaluated, it allowed then time to say, maybe there was things that we could make better or change. And that allowed for streamlining of the program and the processes. briefly mentioned their advantages and disadvantages of remote technology. So 10 years ago, if the pandemic had happened, would we have had the technology in place to deal with it? Most likely not. But still, we were in a position where we were able to move to work remotely. But in a place like Ireland, where not everybody has broadband connectivity, and people, if they were working at the university and then had to move to a remote way of working, would have moved home. That might not, their home might not have been in Limerick. It could have been in a remote part of Ireland where they might not have had access to broadband. So internet connectivity was very important. So even though we had the technology there, we're all very familiar now as we're all using Zoom and Teams and different software packages like that. If you don't have a good enough internet connection, then it can bring disadvantages then of dropped calls and lagging in time of sound and that. So it had lots of advantages and disadvantages. Then the problem of asking questions in a virtual environment. So the workshops that were planned for the students all involved an element of interaction, and questions and answers were a very good part of that. How to implement that though in a virtual sphere was very hard. We found that people weren't as confident asking questions in a virtual environment. So using, let's say, the chat and speaking up and maybe turning on cameras and that. So that was something that was a challenge. Now we had ways of getting around that. We used software that allowed us to create surveys and polls for the students where they could pose questions anonymously and get their answers very quickly during a workshop. So things like that worked well, but it wasn't very straightforward. We had to come up with workarounds such as that. Other challenges and opportunities. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, networking is something that you do in person, and we had to try then and do that in a virtual environment. It obviously wasn't the same, but we were able to come up with areas where we could make things better. Because we were working virtually, we were able to invite a lot more people to events than we would have before. And also we were able to invite people who weren't located in Limerick. So we could invite someone from a different location who didn't have to travel to a workshop, who would be able to give up their time, not having to give up travel time, but time for an event that they might not have been able to commit to before. So we had access to lots of different speakers. So even though we couldn't have in-person networking, we had virtual networking with a lot more people and a lot more diverse backgrounds. But one of the challenges is mental health. And I briefly mentioned there earlier, the feeling of isolation that we all felt during the pandemic is something that we found that it was good to add another workshop on to the current program during the pandemic, talking specifically about mental health and how to deal with it and how to work virtually and study virtually on your own. So we found that adding extra workshops like that were an advantage. So in conclusion, is a hybrid approach the answer? It looks to us like it is. Going forward, restrictions have started to be lifted now. So in the next iteration of the program, which will be in semester one later in the year in the autumn, hopefully we'll be able to have back to our way of working in person. But the fact that we were able to have more people involved in workshops virtually, and as I mentioned earlier, from other locations, it would be something to look at, having a hybrid approach where we could have some virtual events and some events in person. Collaboration is something that leads on from the ability to have more people at events that we weren't able to have before. So it allowed for more collaboration, as I mentioned there, with people from different backgrounds. We're looking at a student-led mentorship as well, because from talking to the students after the program and getting their feedback, we found that mentorship led from a student could have a greater impact, because during the virtual events, for example, like the award ceremony, what we did was we were able, as I mentioned there earlier, to invite more people. So not only were families invited to the award ceremony for the students, but also the students' schools were invited. And the students then in schools were able to see past pupils of their school, winning awards from a multinational company like J&J. So we saw the value then of having these students as mentors themselves. as ambassadors for the program, but also ambassadors for STEM in general, to show students in schools, what is possible. So thank you all for your time. I welcome any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Mary. And as we are running behind the schedule, so if we have any question, actually,